Hey there, friends. Welcome to another episode of Strange Planet, and it is a far stranger planet than we can possibly comprehend. On this episode, the Atlantis Puzzle, unlocking the secrets of Plato's final legacy. But before we get to Atlantis, just a friendly reminder, if you'd like to get a little deeper into Strange Planet, you might want to consider becoming a premium subscriber, and it's real easy to do. Just click on the link in the episode notes, strangeplanet.supportingcast.fm, strangeplanet.supportingcast.fm. You gain access to commercial-free listening, special bonus episodes produced exclusively for premium subscribers, and you receive my monthly newsletter, Inner Sanctum, strangeplanet.supportingcast.fm. Has the mystery of Atlantis finally been solved? Well, that's the suggestion of a brand new documentary film coming out later this summer called The Atlantis Puzzle. It's a new international documentary and releasing worldwide, as I say, this summer on Amazon, Prime Video, other streaming platforms. Years in the making, showcasing the Greek researcher George Sarantitis and his profound realization the Atlantis story suffered from key mistranslations that rendered it fantasy. The director of The Atlantis Puzzle is Jack Kelley. He's a writer, producer known for the movie Solver in 2018. Raised in upstate New York, graduated from Yale with a degree in architecture and had a previous career on Wall Street prior to founding Empire Builder Productions. Empire Builder produced Solver and develops documentaries, feature films, and related entertainment projects. He splits his time between Europe, New Mexico, where we've reached him today, and the great state of Texas. Jack Kelley, welcome to Strange Planet. How are you?
Richard, I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on the show today.
Let's talk a little bit first about Greek researcher George Sarantitis. Is it Sarantitis or Sarantitis?
Sarantitis, yeah.
Sarantitis. All right.
So George is a really wonderful human being, and it's always refreshing to encounter one of those in this world. I first encountered George's work completely and utterly by accident. So I wasn't out looking to do a film on Atlantis. I'm actually a deeply skeptical person. And frankly, I'm with apologies to a lot of people out there, I'm not a fringe theorist kind of guy. So I was on vacation on the Greek island of Santorini with my wife. And that's one of the places that have been thought to contribute to the Atlantis myth, purely by happenstance, right? There was a huge volcanic eruption there around 1600 BC. And today, there's sort of a volcanic central island with a little bit of a ring around it. So a lot of people said, hey, this sounds kind of like Atlantis. It's right there. And there are buried ancient ruins there from a real civilization that was fairly advanced for 1600 BC. And that's what I was interested in. It's called Akrotiri. So we were staying in a hotel nearby there. And, we're in the lobby one day, probably waiting for a taxi or something. And there's a bookshelf. My wife just reaches out and grabs one of the books. She says, hey, you might be interested in this. And it's a book that was called the Atlantis Conference 2008 or something like that. I said to myself, somebody had an academic conference about Atlantis? I've never heard about this in my life. This just sounds nuts. And, I didn't have any books with me, so I started just reading this by the pool while I'm on vacation. And I stumbled on two papers that had been submitted to that conference by this guy, George Sarantitis. And, I studied the classics at Yale in a program called Directed Studies. I studied Latin. I'm pretty good classical education. And as I'm reading through, some of these papers and things in here seem like nonsense. I got to Sarantitis. I said, holy Toledo, this guy might have cracked this. Like, this is right. This is accurate. Oh, wait a minute. Okay, the ancient Greek says this. And I think Sarantitis, so I wrote him an email and promptly heard nothing back for about 4 months. He wrote me back later during the pandemic and said, hey, sorry, I didn't get back to you. I was in the hospital with COVID. So he was one of the early people who was affected by that. But we had our first conversation, I think, lasted about 3 or 4 hours. And this man he was educated as a professional engineer. He was born in Athens, Greece, studied ancient Greek in high school and college and stuff like that. And Sarantitis loves philosophy. And he loves Plato. And what I think a lot of people don't know is that Plato is the progenitor. He was the original source we have of the Atlantis myth.
Right.
So Sarantitis, his real fascination with this was because he's a very logical guy, and being an engineer, he just couldn't accept the idea that Plato would write kind of nonsense fairy tales. So he kind of looked at, and Plato does use myth at different points in his narratives. And he sort of said, there's got to be more to it than this. And a lot of academicians would say, well, these are allegories, right? It's a little bit like Aesop's fairy tales or things like that.
Right. It's about hubris and things like that.
Yeah, exactly. There's this thought, and this is what the Atlantis myth, I think, has been thought of in academia for a long time. And frankly, I was of the same opinion until I encountered Sarantitis' work.
All right. So let's talk about Plato's two commentaries, Timaeus and Critias, written 2,400 years ago. That's where we get most of the details concerning Plato. I mean, there are some pretty precise dimensions and descriptions in there. So first of all, who was Timaeus?
Right. So Timaeus and Critias are two characters who appear in these dialogues. So the dramatic scenario is you got Socrates, whom I think most people know of. He was this sort of ancient Greek philosopher who was Plato's teacher. And he was actually put to death for his ideas, I believe around 399 BC. And in these dialogues that Plato wrote, you have a situation where Socrates is having a conversation with, three other guys. And one of them is Timaeus, one of them is Critias, and there's a third guy named Hermocrates. What's super interesting about the way that this is laid out is that the Timaeus is a complete dialogue, right? It's start to finish, we got the whole book. Critias is sort of cuts off mid-sentence, right? It's a shorter book, and that's where really most of the meat and the detail about Atlantis is. There's a short section in Timaeus that kind of alludes that they're going to get there, but they then, each guy gives a speech. So Timaeus then gives his speech, which is very different. And then in Critias, which is, the dialogue, the speech by the character Critias tells his story. And that's the one that's sort of cut off. And then what most people kind of forget is that we were promised a third story by Hermocrates, but we never get that. That book doesn't exist as far as we know. It was never written or disappeared from the historical record.
Right. So is it Timaeus or Critias that is a descendant of this historian, I think it's Solon, who traveled to Egypt at some point, kind of was writing a history of the world, and traveled to Egypt and met with some priests affiliated with this temple, and that's how he supposedly learned about Atlantis?
Sure. So I'll kind of give you the story that takes place in the dialogue. And I have to say, Richard, that this story is going to be a little different than what I think most people have in their mind when they think of Atlantis. Like if I mention Atlantis to you, you've been investigating the uncanny for a long time. You've probably heard every different version of this you can possibly imagine, right?
Probably.
But the actual version is just what's in these two dialogues. This is the story. So actually, Plato was a distant relative of Solon on his mother's side. And Critias is telling the story. He heard it from his grandfather, who was also named Critias. Critias heard it from his father, who was a guy named Dropides, who was buddies with Solon. So this is already going back. It's like if your grandpa told you a story about World War I that he heard from his dad, right? So that's the analogy. So Critias started telling this story, and he says, listen, this is an absolutely true story. I heard it when I was a kid from my grandpa. He heard it from Dropides, and Dropides was like Solon's best buddy. So Solon was one of what are known as the seven sages, wise men of ancient Greece. And and Solon was known to be the wisest, and he was this lawgiver of the Athenian state. So he laid out many of the laws which governed Athens, call it around 600 BC. So he traveled. So it was actually quite clever, if I remember the story right. He laid out all the laws. Then he took off on a 10-year vacation so nobody could ask him to change them. So he went, among other places, he went to the Temple of Sais in the Egyptian Nile Delta. Mm-hmm. And that's where he was very enthused to talk with these priests at this giant temple, the remains of which are now just ruins that are kind of sunken in the delta, right? So we don't have that temple anymore, but it did exist, real place. And he talked to these priests about the ancient history, and he started, the ancient history of Greece and the world, and he started kind of telling him what the Greeks knew, which inevitably, right, when you go far enough back, turns from history into myth. And the priest just kind of made fun of him. He's like, you Greeks don't know anything. Mm-hmm. You know, you guys have a very limited understanding of the ancient past. And I'm going to tell you why. It's because you Greeks, every time there's some major disaster or war or, wildfires or floods, whatever, or some kind of cataclysm that takes place in your civilization, you guys get kind of reduced back to like this very subsistence level of life. And you forget things because you don't have writing. Your writing doesn't persist. But we here in Egypt have a much more temperate climate. We're not subject to floods or wildfires. We got the Nile right here. We got fresh water. We're all good. And therefore, we've been able to keep track of ancient history in a very detailed way. And we have it all written down, safeguarded in our temples. And as a matter of fact, I'm so confident that we know more than you. I'm going to tell you a story about your own ancient Athenian ancestors that you don't even know about. And it's the story of Atlantis.
Wow. So let's get into the description, what the Egyptians told Solon, who then told his descendants, and eventually it came to Critias and Socrates and then Plato. How did he describe Atlantis? And you can get into, as much specifics here as you want, because I know there's a lot of detail and like right down to measurements and stadia and so forth.
Absolutely. So the story is a real strange one, right? It suggests that there was a great war that took place 9,000 years before this meeting of Solon and the priest. So that would have been roughly 9600 BC. And I think a lot of fringe theorists like to point out that that's significant because that's about the beginning of what we consider to be the Holocene epoch, which is a sort of major transition that took place in real life between the Pleistocene and the Holocene, where people primarily went from being hunter-gatherers and started to transition to farming, and a lot of new, changes in tool making and things took place. So it is it's also significant because there were huge climatary disruptions. And this is another thing people like to point to. They say, well, maybe there was some glacial outburst flood up in Canada and the ice caps, and that, had an influence on the climate and disrupted a lot of things, maybe flooded some places. And to a certain extent, that is true. The sea level was lower prior to, the early Holocene, and it did start to rise, and it's higher today than it was back then. So that's all true. So in this story, this is when this takes place, and there was this great war. Now, the Atlanteans were a power that emerged somewhere in the west, swept across North Africa, conquered Egypt, and conquered all the way up to kind of central Italy in the Western Mediterranean. However, the noble Athenians of 9600 BC, and of course we know that Athens in its historic form didn't really exist back then, but in the story, there's these Athenians and they repel these Atlantean invaders. And in fact, if you read the story carefully, later, they've driven the Atlanteans all the way back. They've liberated Egypt. They've liberated the Mediterranean. They've liberated North Africa. And they take the fight all the way to the Atlantean capital city. And then there's, probably terrible fighting, but there's also massive storms and earthquakes and flooding that takes place. And as the story says, in a day and a night, there was the destruction of the Atlantean capital city, and there was the entire Athenian army was I'm going to use Sarantitis' translation, basically buried alive by massive landslides and what's called liquefaction, and that's when you have an earthquake and there's wet soil, and it basically turns to quicksand because of the vibration. And anybody can see this on the beach. You go walking on the beach and there's wet sand. You put your foot in it. What happens? You sink in, right? If it's dry sand, you don't sink in as much. So these are real observable phenomena. So that's the gist of the story. And there are what you pointed out earlier is there's some very specific directions in geometry that Plato lays out. He describes the Atlantean city as a series of concentric rings. There are a heck of a lot of detail about this city in terms of its layout, its temples, all the things it had, the canals that it had, where those canals were located, and how the seas that different seas connected and so forth to get to this city. I'm going to go ahead and say that, spoiler alert, a lot of people have already had this out on social media for years. There's a place called the Rashat structure in modern-day Mauritania, in the Adrar Plateau. And this...
Northwest Africa.
Northwest Africa. And this place appears, it's a natural formation, so it's not precise, perfect circle, but this appears to match Plato's description with a degree of accuracy that's almost shocking.
Yes.
Right. And so a lot of people have popped up and said, "Oh, that's the capital city of Atlantis. I solved it all. I got it all figured out." I think the difference between a lot of these theorists and Sarantitis is a little bit like when you're studying calculus in high school and you can get partial credit for doing it right. Like if I say, "Hey, what's the answer to this calculus equation?" and you say 5, and you're like, because you're pretty sure 5 is right, and you got to look at the teacher's notes. But I do all the work and I get 5. Who really solved the problem? Right.
Yeah. Show me your work. You got to show me how you got there.
I'm going to give credit to George, because George did something amazing, and I'm going to tell you what the key was to what sparked years of work by this guy. He was reading this myth, and something struck him, because he can read ancient Greek, and he can read modern Greek, and he can read English. So he was reading it in modern Greek and modern English translations, and he said the first thing he noticed was it said this continent, Atlantis, was in the Atlantic Ocean. But then he's reading the ancient Greek text side by side, and he says, that's not what this says. And so what's incredible here, Richard, is that we have a story, almost unbelievable, of a mistranslation that's been perpetuated for hundreds of years. Why? What the ancient Greek actually says, and I have a very cursory knowledge of ancient Greek. I was better at Latin, but very cursory. But I can read it and I can see it myself. You too could Google this and read it yourself. It says an Atlantic Pelagos. Pelagos is a word which is still used in modern Greek, and it refers to the Aegean Sea, the Ionian Sea. Places that are partially enclosed by land, have islands around them. That's what a pelagos is. So this says to get to Atlantis, presumably from Greece, you have to cross an Atlantic pelagos. You have to go through the Pillars of Heracles, cross an Atlantic pelagos, which in Plato's era was no longer navigable, right? That means it had kind of silted up or dried up. From there, you proceed to a different sea, an Atlantic Pontos, and from there to a third Atlantic Pelagos, which is adjacent to the capital city of Atlantis. So Sarantitis sees this and he says, it's a bit like Indiana Jones and Raiders of the Lost Ark, where like Sala and Indy look at each other and say, they're digging in the wrong place, Mm-hmm. So for basically all of history, as far as Sarantitis could see, people had translated the word Pelagos as Atlantic Pelagos as Atlantic Ocean because nobody had ever heard of an Atlantic Pelagos. Where the heck is that? Point me to that on the map, right? But everyone knew where the Atlantic Ocean was. And they said, oh, well, must be what he meant. But the thing is, Richard, the ancient Greeks were a massively sea dependent and sea trading people. They were masterful sailors. They had different words for different kinds of bodies of water. The Black Sea, what we call in English Black Sea, they called the Euxinos Pontos, which basically translated means something like the sea, the Pontos Sea that is friendly to strangers. The Aegean was a Pelagos. The Ionian was a Pelagos. The Mediterranean was called a Thalassa, right? And then they believed there was a great body of water that encircled the known three ancient continents, right? Europe, Asia, and Africa. And they called that Okeanos. It doesn't say Okeanos once in Timaeus or Critias. Right. I know this sounds crazy, but anybody out there can go online. There's Perseus, Tufts University has a wonderful catalog of all these things, both in English and in ancient Greek. You too can verify these facts. So
is it possible, though, that when people talk about Atlantis, they're really talking about the capital city, whereas the Atlantean, empire or the Atlantean provinces may have been scattered all over the world. People talk about Bimini Road in off the coast of Bermuda underwater, and some people talk about the Minoan civilization was really the Atlantean civilization and so forth. So when we talk about Atlantis, are we really, when we're looking for Atlantis, are we really looking for the capital city?
Yeah, so this was another key mistranslation that Sarantitis identified, right? So there's a word, and forgive me, it's escaping me at the moment, in ancient Greek, which is translated in three different ways. There's the ringed capital city islands. There's this it's described as a pointed island of Atlantis, and then there's the continent island of Atlantis. And all these three were sort of part of the confusion of that document is that people had kind of conflated these, right? So when it says, and so Sarantitis also pointed out that there's some very nuanced ancient Greek grammar, which you probably wouldn't, no offense to these earlier translators who were probably fine classicists, but it's very nuanced. So if you're not looking for it, you could easily miss it or misinterpret it, right? It's very subtle. Where he basically says that, it's not that a continent sank or that this big giant pointed island sank. It is that the central capital city was flooded. Now, automatically, if we're talking about West Africa, you're talking about this ringed area. Suddenly, no continents are sinking in the middle of the ocean thanks to a tsunami, right? That's not physically possible. And I've interviewed earthquake experts at Oregon State University and so forth to corroborate that is, in fact, impossible. So what Sarantitis kind of did was say, look, this was in the realm of fantasy. I'm bringing it back to what reality, and my views are supported by the ancient Greek text. And basically, somebody proved me wrong, right? And so what you're sort of identifying is this idea of looking at a lot of other ancient ruins and extrapolating, that there were colonies or different civilizations connecting places across time and space. This is kind of something that emerged, I'm going to say, out of kind of the 19th century thinking, right? There was this guy named Ignatius Donnelly, who I'm sure you're familiar with, who was the first guy who really theorized and put out in a book that there was a sunken continent in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. And he theorized based on some very interesting cultural similarities between and among like the Maya and the Egyptians and so forth, that these civilizations had all been connected at some point, right? We see a lot of these stepped pyramids. You see them in Egypt, you see them in the Middle East, you see them in Central America. And so you have to remember, though, that archaeology as a science hadn't really gotten started at that point, right? So like Flinders Petrie, the father of modern archaeology, I think was, probably just getting going in his career when Ignatius Donnelly published this in I think it was like the 1880s. So I think that's where a lot of that thinking has come from. And a lot of people today really just look at Donnelly like he was a moron and he should never have been touched. He was actually a U.S. congressman, which probably doesn't speak great for the United States, but worse things have happened. I think he was an amateur. He was actually a very intelligent guy. He just didn't have the benefit of the awareness of, for example, the theory of plate tectonics,
Right.
or our modern understanding of geophysics.
We'll take a quick time out. Jack Kelley is with us, director of the Atlantis Puzzle, Unlocking Plato's Lost Legacy. Back with more of our conversation right after these. Hi there. If you want to watch the rest of these episodes, please head over to my Rumble channel, Richard Saret's Strange Planet. You can watch complete episodes there. New, complete, unedited episodes drop every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. Again, the Rumble channel is Richard Saret's Strange Planet. In the meantime, I want to thank you for supporting this YouTube channel all of these years. However, the problem is I never know when I'm going to run afoul of the censors at YouTube. I never know when I'm going to end up in YouTube jail. There doesn't seem to be any rhyme or reason. And in fact, 2 more strikes and this YouTube channel will be taken down altogether. So help me fight big tech censorship, enjoy the complete unedited episodes, and join the rest of the Strange Planet community over on Rumble. Again, Richard Saret's Strange Planet on rumble.com. See you over there. Jack Kelley is here, director of the Atlantis Puzzle, Unlock the Secrets of Plato's Final Legacy, and this will be available on Amazon and other platforms, streaming platforms, later this summer. Let's just back away from the theory of where Atlantis is for a moment, and just spend a few minutes talking about the production of the film itself. How long did it take you? Where did you go? Where did you travel? What were some of the the obstacles or challenges you faced while filming?
Yeah, thanks for asking about that, Richard. I think most people only see the final product of films and TV and things like that. There's a ton of work, and there's a lot of people that I would like to give credit to, who worked on this project, on both sides of the Atlantic Ocean. So we did some, as I may have mentioned, we did some filming with an earthquake expert, Dr. Scott Ashford, up at Oregon State University, where they have this enormous machine the size of a warehouse that reproduces tsunamis. And it's this enormous wave pool. So I went up there, interviewed him, so you'll get to see some of that in the film. And we talked at length about George Sarantitis' theory and getting into the nuts and bolts of, was what Plato described realistic? How might this disaster have actually happened? On the east side of the Atlantic, most of the film was shot in Greece, and I spent about a year living in Greece during the pandemic. So this goes to talk about hubris. I thought we could sort of whisk in there, do all the interviews with Sarantitis, go shoot on location at Plato's Academy and so forth in about maybe 4 months, and then kind of get out of there and go home. I was mistaken. It wound up taking about a year to get everything done. As you might remember, during the pandemic, government offices were often closed down. Very hard to get permits. There was a lot of work that had to be done, and we actually had some people. Actually, had a cameraman suffer from heat stroke. There was a heat wave when we were filming in Greece, and it's 7:30 in the morning on the final day of shooting, and I don't have a cameraman. And that's very disturbing when you're on a tight time frame. And I had to fly out, a couple days later, so there wasn't much opportunity. So at the last minute, we had to scramble. We got a new guy, and that was the day when we were going to be out filming on a boat. And as it turned out, the new camera guy that we managed to find got horribly seasick. He's like the only Greek who doesn't sail. And so he immediately got seasick while we're on the boat. I also learned something, Richard, that I didn't know before filming this, which is that I get seasick.
Uh-huh.
So you're going to see what I'm going to call, and I don't consider myself an actor, but the finest acting I've ever done, where I pretend that I'm not feeling just utterly wretched on this boat when I'm interviewing Sarantitis on the boat toward the end of the film. So, really wonderful opportunity, though, because of the pandemic, to film at these ancient sites where there was nobody there, right? So normally that would cost ludicrous sums of money that a small production company like mine could not afford, right? It just wouldn't be economic, right? If you got to pay $100,000 to close down the Acropolis,
right,
you just can't do that every day of shooting. You're going to wind up spending millions of dollars. But because of the pandemic and this heat wave, we were shooting in the ancient agora. I think there were about 5 other people there. And we just sort of say, oh, excuse me, miss, could you just wait over there for a minute while we get this shot? And we were able to get some wonderful footage in front of ancient Greek temples, in front of the Acropolis, and so forth. So, sometimes you can't control the conditions externally. You can only really control how you try to respond to them.
So getting back to you mentioned the Rashat structure. Without giving everything away, obviously, but what do you think of the theory of the Rashat structure? And I mean, it does seem to fit so much. I've done programs with this with an author by the name of David Edward, who talks about the Rashat structure and how it almost ticks all the boxes. What are your thoughts?
So one of the questions we have to ask ourselves, Richard, is how did this story get to Solon and the priest and or Plato over the course of 9,000 years, right? That alone ought to give us some pause, right? Is this really true, or is this a little bit of as some have suggested, this kind of game of telephone where, okay, maybe something happened in the distant past, and we got kind of a brushed up version of it, right? And you can think about this a little bit in the way when like Hollywood remakes an older film or something like that, right? You had an original story and it went through a couple different iterations, and now you have a new one. One of the things that supports the idea that the Rashat is the place Plato was referencing, right? Because again, the measurements he gives are extremely precise. And some people say, well, he might be off by half a kilometer or whatever. To that I ask, how would you describe that place without using a picture? You would describe circles that are concentric and you would give measurements and so forth. Okay, are you off by a few hundred meters here or there? Yeah, I'm sure you would be, right? Because nobody has a perfect map of that in their mind. One of the things that supports the idea that the Rashat is the place that Plato was talking about is A, there's no other place on Earth that has those measurements. B, it's located in West Africa, and the direction of the conquest of the Atlanteans sort of swept across North Africa, conquered Egypt, but didn't go farther. Moved up into the central Mediterranean, but didn't go farther toward Asia, toward Turkey. The other thing that, because I spent a lot of time fact checking this because I don't like to put stuff out that I think is BS. One of the missing pieces, and you remember I mentioned, it says in Plato's dialogue that at that time, actually the literal translation is at that time of the Atlantean War, the there Pelagos, the sea there, was navigable, implying that in Plato's era, the sea is not navigable. The Atlantic Ocean has never been closed off, right? The Mediterranean Sea did close up about 5 million years ago. That's a whole nother crazy story. But for the last 5 million years, the Mediterranean has been navigable. So, and humanity's only been around for about maybe 300,000 years. So here's the key piece, though. Today, people say, well, look, this is the Sahara Desert. How could this story be true in the first place, right? You tell me these guys were out here camp, what are they doing? Camped out in tents? I mean, this doesn't look like the Atlantis that's described. How could anybody thrive here? Mauritania is one of the most sparsely populated countries in the world today. So they say, well, how is this possible? And what the key piece that we've only really started to understand in I would say the last half century is something called the Green Sahara.
Right.
And the climate, and this is non-controversial, the climate shifts about every 20,000 years in North Africa for reasons that have to do with, the tilt of the Earth and the obliquity of our orbit around the sun. A lot of subtle changes that add up to basically the shift in the African monsoon belts and the Mediterranean monsoon belt, which kind of move together and render what's lifeless desert as a kind of like maybe a savannah environment. Think about Kenya today, right? Where you got lots of oases and sort of fields, and there's giraffes out nibbling on trees and stuff like that. This is the world that is described, and Plato says, there were lots of waterways, there were elephants living all over the place, a lot of other animals, and he specifically talks about how much water there was everywhere.
Right. I mean, you see that is it the Perry-Reese map of that area? You see elephants and all sorts of animals in what is now the Sahara Desert.
Yeah, well, I'm not sure about that map, but I can say with certainty that the historical ancient call it habitat of elephants extended all the way up to North Africa. Mm-hmm. And you can remember that Hannibal, who fought the Romans, and he came from Carthage, which is in modern Tunisia, very north part of Africa.
Yeah,
he had war elephants, right?
Yeah, crossed the Alps with them.
Yeah, yes, sir. That's right. I believe he said, "We will find a way or make one," when he was coming through there. So the elephant was a part of it, and now the water. What about this Green Sahara? Well, guess what, Richard? Today in Tunisia, where I've been to Tunisia, there are these series of very shallow salt lakes called chats, and which is a French name. These salt lakes are super shallow. They are quite large, some of them. In 9600 BC, there was an enormous paleo lake here called the Schatz Mega Lake. Bingo, the Atlantic Pelagos. Today, it's not really navigable. You can see photos, if you Google this, of like Tunisian rowboats and stuff sitting dry on a very, like what looks like a salt flat. But in the rainy season, those lakes will fill up, maybe a few feet today. We know for a fact that during the Green Sahara, there was a huge body of water here. And that this has happened many times throughout these cycles of the Green Sahara, going back hundreds of thousands of years, right? So furthermore, there was another huge lake. I'm going to get this wrong. I think it's the Annette Moyer Mega Lake that was further south. Does that sound like the Atlantic Pontos, right? The other sea.
Right.
And then we know that there were other bodies of water. There have been freshwater fossils found around the Rashat and lots of stone tools. People were living here, and there was a shitload of water here. It's surrounded on three sides by the Adrar Plateau. So, you can see when you look on Google Satellite or whatever, you can see the water runoff for over a long period of time. And you got to remember that the monsoons of those days were super powerful, something maybe more akin to what happens a little further south in Africa today. Like in 2012, there were massive floods in Nigeria that rendered like 2 million people homeless, right? In a modern nation. So if that's the power of the monsoon season in Africa now, little reason to believe it wasn't that powerful, but just extended further north in the Green Sahara period, which supports the Rashat as, the location, and also kind of hints at how the flooding of that area could happen. Richard, when I was in my early 20s, I lived in a city called Daegu, South Korea. I was over there for a year. Long story. But that is a city that is surrounded kind of on three sides by mountains. And let me tell you something. They have a real problem with water runoff and flooding during storms and stuff sometimes. And that's the exact same thing you would get at the Rashat. runoff from a partially surrounded plateau in a very kind of hard, rocky underlying ground that doesn't allow for a lot of dissipation or absorption of water. So both from a physical, real climate perspective, from Plato's dimensions, and from the bodies of water he describes, which loosely fit, what types of bodies of water might have existed, 9,600 BC.
There you go. So again, we're ticking more boxes for the Rashat structure.
Yes, sir. Yeah, it appears that way. Certainly appears that way.
All right.
Yeah.
Another quick timeout, back with more of my conversation with Jack Kelley, the Atlantis Puzzle. Hi there. If you want to watch the rest of these episodes, please head over to my Rumble channel, Richard Saret's Strange Planet. You can watch complete episodes there. New, complete, unedited episodes drop every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. Again, the Rumble channel is Richard Saret's Strange Planet. In the meantime, I want to thank you for supporting this YouTube channel all of these years. However, the problem is I never know when I'm going to run afoul of the censors at YouTube. I never know when I'm going to end up in YouTube jail. There doesn't seem to be any rhyme or reason. And in fact, 2 more strikes and this YouTube channel will be taken down altogether. So help me fight big tech censorship, enjoy the complete unedited episodes, and join the rest of the Strange Planet community over on Rumble. Again, Richard Saret's Strange Planet on rumble.com. See you over there. And we are back with Jack Kelley, director of the Atlantis Puzzle and founder of Empire Builder Productions, which also produced Solver back in 2018. They developed documentaries, feature films, and related entertainment projects in the Atlantis Puzzle, coming to a streaming platform near you later this summer. We often hear about the Atlanteans described as, having advanced farming skills and so forth. I mean, there's a lot more that's sort of built into that myth. If you listen to some theorists, they had flying cars and they had free energy devices and so forth. But just maybe help us separate the wheat from the chaff here. How advanced were the Atlanteans? Certainly in agriculture, right?
Sure. And Richard, this is a really interesting thing that I could talk about for hours. So I'll try and keep it short because of our time together today. So there's no descriptions, or I should say, the descriptions within the books we have from Plato sound very much like a Bronze Age civilization. Right. So that's not to say those people aren't advanced, but maybe think like the Mycenaeans or Troy or something like that. That's kind of the image that we're getting.
The Etruscans.
Yeah. So you have these peoples in the Mediterranean with whom Plato would, and all his readers would have been totally familiar. So he's describing a civilization that has, yes, a lot of stuff that we don't see until later civilizations, because again, the time frame we're talking about here is 9600 BC or BCE, however you want to say it, in West Africa.
Yeah, that's
right?
like 6,000 years before the Bronze Age.
Yes, yeah. So what's interesting there is this an example of people who are ahead of their time, or is this an example of drawing from known references? And I'm gonna tell you that in the film, the Atlantis Puzzle, we spend a lot of time looking into the true versus false in this story. And I know I'm going to piss some people off here. some of these things that are talked about in the story simply can't be true, or they're not true until later in history, or maybe they were true, but we don't see these things until a few thousand years later, or we see them at the same time, actually. Great examples, Göbekli Tepe. You have all these, circular temples with these huge things. And for people who don't know, that's in Turkey, modern day Turkey. Massive, site, which was constructed by hunter-gatherer people. And we're talking about people in this era in West Africa who are believed to have been hunter-gatherers. However, you pointed out some things like agriculture, things like irrigation, or building cities. Those things did begin at the dawn of the Holocene in the Middle East. We know there are places in Israel. There are, there's Göbekli Tepe. There's a number of places in the Middle East that show a civilization that had early types of farming. Certainly in the Egyptian Nile Valley, there was probably very early, maybe 8,000 BC, maybe a little earlier. Remember, there's a difference between what's possible, what's probable, and what's provable, right? So is it probable that people were using agriculture maybe a few thousand years before we know? I would bet you that we discover that any day, right? But can we prove it? Well, no, maybe the oldest we can prove. Actually, there's also the question of what comprises agriculture, right? Because you have semi-domesticated crops being harvested by people way earlier than what we would consider domesticated crops, right? So people taking advantage of the plant world, but not in a way we might consider as modern farming. But as you can see, it's like a very gray area. So one of the things we looked at is there isn't evidence in West Africa that's been discovered so far of farming or of irrigation on the massive scale that Plato describes it, right? At this time period. Later, in the middle of North Africa, there's a people called the Garamantes who had thousands of kilometers of underground irrigation systems. Modern day Iran, Persia, has these things, I'm going to pronounce this wrong, I think it's like wanats, which are these massive underground irrigation systems that can go for miles and miles and miles, right? Some of them can be dozens of miles long. So ancient people certainly were capable of digging a trench and moving water around, right? I mean, we see this very early in Egypt. So it's not that it's not impossible that people had agriculture and irrigation. There's no physical evidence yet discovered from that time period, right? So I think, again, we have to say it's not that these people were somehow stupid savages in 9600 BC. We can very clearly see that that's not the case at place sites in the Middle East. So one of the other things, and I'm just going to focus on this because I find it the most astounding, Richard, is ancient seafaring, right? Because if you think about the myth, and this is one of the things we really looked at, what does it imply? Well, if you're going from North Africa to Europe, you have to cross the Mediterranean Sea. And one of the questions I asked was early on when I was reading this, I said, wait a minute, did people really have boats that could cross the Mediterranean in 9600 BC? I mean, that just, to me, that sounded far-fetched. I don't know about you, but I always thought that like the Egyptians had the oldest boats, or maybe like, the Assyrians or somebody in the Middle East, maybe around 3,000 or 4,000 BC, give or take. That's utterly untrue. This, just how untrue, is one of the most shocking things I discovered, which opens the door to a completely different way, I think, of looking at our ancient past. So while the ancient Atlanteans, there's no proof, and I'm going to call them Atlanteans, these West Africans, as far as we know, didn't have metallurgy. We can't prove that they had sustained farming and irrigation. There's no signs of any massive cities from this time period, right? There's loose stone and sand at the Rashat, right? So we can't prove those things, but the seafaring is a different story. So there's a difference again between the oldest physical boat that still exists today and evidence that people were sailing. And a perfect example of this, Richard, is if you have a signet ring and you stamp it into wax on a letter, and then your ring is lost or melted down to turn into somebody's soup spoon, we still see that signet on the wax years later. We know that a ring or some other type of object made the impression, right?
Right.
So that's a little bit like when you see evidence of human habitation on islands that were never connected to the mainland. You know that somebody got there, either they swam 500 miles, probably not,
Right.
or they took a boat of some sort. And this is what we see. Crete, recent discovery, I think it was 2017, 2018, and everybody can look this up. There was a group there looking, they thought they were going to find some artifacts from around 9,000 BC, which alone would have pushed back the habitation of Crete by about 2,000 years. They found that. So this is roughly the same time frame as the Atlantis myth, 9,000 BC. They also found stuff going back like 25,000 BC, 40,000 years ago, 80,000 years ago, 125,000 years ago. Evidence of man-made tools, right? And in those days, stone tools were napped. It's called napping flint. You make these things. And here, I think it was some type of quartzite stone that they were looking at. And they were looking for the wrong thing. Everybody was looking for flint tools, but when they realized they also were using quartzite, and they started looking at the quartzite, they could see evidence of human activity on making these tools. That proves, Richard, that people were sailing the Mediterranean Sea, not for hundreds, not for thousands, but for tens or hundreds of thousands of years before the Atlantis myth takes place.
Wow, that's remarkable.
I think that's remarkable. It's remarkable.
So they may or may not have developed advanced agriculture, but they weren't able to defeat the let's call them the proto-ancient Greeks, the Athenians in war. So they weren't that advanced, obviously, if they couldn't defeat the Athenians. So the question, I guess, is what was so remarkable about them that Plato decided to, write about them in two of his commentaries?
That's a fantastic question. And here, Richard, I think we're going back to the classic academic view of these two books, which is that this was an allegory about hubris and military aggression and sort of bad government. And the Atlanteans were bad, so they got punished by the gods, right? That's the story. Let me ask you a question. Does that sound like a story written by the greatest thinker of the ancient world? Or does it sound like a kid's bedtime story?
Well, maybe elements of both, but more of a children's bedtime story, I would say.
And this is what I think, now we start to get into what I find to be some of the most interesting questions, right? Why did Plato write this story? And what was he trying to communicate with it? And also, how are we reading it as modern people? Are we maybe having a little bit of hubris? Maybe we think we know better. Oh, he said Atlantic Sea, but he really meant Atlantic Ocean because he was a dope. I'm smarter than he is, right? No, you're not. I mean, if somebody is not a better philosopher than Plato, a better poet than Homer, or a better general than call it Pericles or somebody like that, you have something to learn from the ancient world. And this is where I start to get a little excited, because I think that advancement isn't just about agriculture, or isn't just about how big your army is, or even if you have airplanes or a cell phone, right? Today we walk around and we think we're the smartest people who ever lived because I have an iPhone in my pocket and I can look up anything. I can call my friend. I can book an airline ticket with a flick of my thumb. But go back to Euclidean geometry. I mean, I'd like to see your average person on the street do that. Mm-hmm. They can't. I'd like to see somebody write an epic like the Iliad or the Odyssey. They can't, right? I mean, you say, hey, here's 1,200 pages of paper and a pen. Get going. Let me know when you're done, right? Write me a masterpiece, and they can't. So mental skill and ability. And here's where we got to go back to who was Plato? Who are his students? Why was he writing these books? He's writing these things for his students to educate them or to teach them something, or he's writing them for other highly educated people of his own era, right? Ancient Athens, classical period, around 400 BC. If you're going to write a story like that, and this goes back to George Sarantitis, the Greek researcher whose theories the film explores, the Atlantis Puzzle talks about, why would Plato write a myth? What specifically is it about this? Because clearly some of this stuff could be true, and clearly some of it just can't be true. It seems like it's a mixture of truth and falsehood. Why would somebody write that? And Sarantitis had this idea, which is supported by kind of mainstream academia. Plato loved puzzles. And he loved, if you go and read his other books, and I went back and read half of his books that I hadn't touched since I was in college, and I thought, holy crap, I missed a lot here. The way that he writes is not like a modern textbook, right? He's not saying, and this happened, and this happened, and this happened, and, blah, blah, blah. He's laying out a problem or a puzzle that you have to solve. And this is one of the most intriguing aspects of this. And you go and read any of his other books, there's a puzzle there. There's questions. And I also want to point out that his mentor Socrates, remember, was put to death for being a philosopher. Don't you think if your mentor was put to death, that would have some influence on you? So oftentimes when Plato's writing, he layers things several layers deep.
Encrypted.
It's very hard.
He's encrypted his writing.
Very much so. It's a question of, why is he doing that? Maybe he doesn't want to be put to death, right? He wants to say something, and so he distances himself from it by saying, here, a great example, he's have Socrates out walking with some guy. They run into a third guy. That guy says, oh, I heard this great story from my cousin who was at a dinner party last Tuesday, and I'm going to tell it to you, right? Well, already we know that's plausible deniability, right? Oh, it's just a story I heard.
Brilliant.
So let's take a look, and this is another part. This is sort of the third part of the film where we really look at what was going on in Plato's lifetime. What lessons was he trying to impart to us? And I want to say that, today there's organizations like the Long Now Foundation, the Memory of Mankind Project, or Moon Arc. These are projects that are very concerned with deep time, and they're concerned with what are people 10,000 years from now going to know about us today? I think Plato was the first person to think about this over 2,400 years ago, right? He's writing a story set, 9,000 years before, well, maybe about 9,200 years before his own time, so far back that nobody alive could hope to have knowledge of what it was. He's pointing out how things get lost. Why is this important? Look at what happened a couple generations before him. Athens was completely destroyed by the Persian army during the Persian Wars. I mean, the most sacred temples were burned to the ground and destroyed, right? His own lifetime. He grew up during the Peloponnesian War, which was a horrible civil war in Greek history between the Athenian alliance and the Spartan alliance, right? Awful war, right? Lasted the better part of 30 or 40 years. He himself fought in that war, most likely, right? Because he was of age at the time. There are parallels in the Atlantis story with the Peloponnesian War. And they're there if you read carefully. Remember, we said the Atlanteans attacked. They were the aggressors. But then what happened? The Athenians, the proto-Athenians, were not satisfied just liberating. They went back and took the fight. They wanted to destroy the central city of the Atlanteans, wipe them out. This is almost exactly the phasing of the Peloponnesian War. The Peloponnesian War started because Thebes, which was a Spartan ally, attacked Plataea, which was an Athenian ally, right? So the aggression came at the Athenians. They were defending. During the Persian War and after the Persian War, the Athenians went around mopping up the Aegean Sea with their navy, defeating isolated Persian outposts. They liberated the whole Aegean. That's true. Remember, the Athenians of the Atlantis myth liberate the Egyptians and liberate the rest of Europe, liberate North Africa. Parallels. But then, second phase, the Athenians got a little smug. And I don't know if you remember your history, but they attacked Syracuse, which became an ally of the Spartans in Sicily. So here you have an expedition by sea heading from east to west to attack a city. Does this sound familiar? And guess what? Do you know what happened there? Horrible loss. Athenian army of maybe up to 50,000 people defeated, killed, captured, and held imprisoned in a giant quarry. Does that sound like a place where you could get buried under the ground, like in the Atlantis myth?
Right, right.
So, and this is and Richard, I know we're limited on time, but that's the tip of the iceberg. So I think in conclusion, I guess, on this subject, I'd just like to say that what I think has happened here is that serious academics dismissed these stories for hundreds of years because they thought it was a nonsense fairy tale. Sarantitis has not only what I've explained to you, but many, many more wonderful, wonderful allusions and analogies and depth within this. And what I think is true is instead of being viewed as two minor books that are kind of random and we can't really explain, and academics get a little embarrassed when you bring up Atlantis, these two books, Timaeus and Critias, are an unacknowledged masterpiece of philosophy, of thinking about deep time, of considering, if you look carefully, the parallels to Plato's own era in this story and the nuances. You can go deeper and deeper and deeper, right? And then philosophically, there's some questions about how do we know what happened in the ancient past if we don't have records? Remember, the priest says, "Hey, we got the records, you don't." So you're basically a child. You have this fantasy view of the past because you don't know, you don't have reliable records. Why is this important, Richard? This may be the last thing I'll leave you with on this subject. Greece had writing far before the classical Greek era. When the Mycenaean era was destroyed, there was this huge collapse, right? And all these cities turned into just like, imagine the Dark Ages, right? It's just everything went downhill. Civilization was destroyed. The palaces were abandoned. Something awful happened. Guess what? The Greeks became illiterate for hundreds of years. Later, writing had to be reinvented around 750 BC. So there was maybe this period of like 300 or more years where the Greeks were mostly illiterate. Does that also sound like the Egyptian priests saying, "Hey, remember when there's disasters, you guys lose your writing. That's why you're such dopes. You don't have cultural continuity, but I got thousands of years of stuff right behind me here in my temple." So there's some real lessons here about war, about hubris, about failing to prepare, about failing to keep your society strong, about moral behavior when you have power. And I think those lessons are highly, highly applicable to us today.
So the Atlantis Puzzle, yes, it's about finding Atlantis, but that's not even half the story. It's not really even about Atlantis. It's about, well, not only the ancient Greeks, but it's about us today. The Atlantis Puzzle unlocked the secrets of Plato's final legacy. And again, just give us the details, Jack, on when we can expect to stream this and where we can find it.
Absolutely. So atlantispuzzle.com, check in there, at the Atlantis Puzzle on Instagram and Facebook. And we will be announcing when we have our specific release date, and we're expecting it to be toward late summer. And please check back with us, and we hope you'll really enjoy it, because among the things you and I discussed, there are many more wonderful things to explore in these ancient mysteries, which I do think, if we take them seriously, are highly relevant for us today.
And we invite viewers, once they watch the Atlantis Puzzle, to leave a review on Amazon and also IMDb. Jack, thank you so much. Great to meet you, and congratulations.
Thank you very much, Richard. It was a pleasure to talk to you today.
Hi there. If you want to watch the rest of these episodes, please head over to my Rumble channel, Richard Saret's Strange Planet. You can watch complete episodes there. New, complete, unedited episodes drop every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. Again, the Rumble channel is Richard Syrett's Strange Planet. In the meantime, I want to thank you for supporting this YouTube channel all of these years. However, the problem is I never know when I'm going to run afoul of the censors at YouTube. I never know when I'm going to end up in YouTube jail. There doesn't seem to be any rhyme or reason. And in fact, 2 more strikes and this YouTube channel will be taken down altogether. So help me fight big tech censorship, enjoy the complete unedited episodes, and join the rest of the Strange Planet community over on Rumble. Again, Richard Syrett's Strange Planet on rumble.com. See you over there. Hello, friends. Welcome once again to another episode of Strange Planet, and it is a far stranger planet than we can possibly imagine. On this episode, lessons from the afterlife. But first, a quick reminder that if you'd like to get a little deeper into Strange Planet, you might want to consider becoming a premium subscriber, and it's real easy to do. Just click on the link in the episode notes, strangeplanet.supportingcast.fm, strangeplanet.supportingcast.fm. You gain access to commercial-free listening, special bonus episodes, 2 per month, produced exclusively for premium subscribers, and you receive my monthly newsletter, Inner Sanctum, strangeplanet.supportingcast.fm. Again, the link in the episode notes. Human life is surrounded by mystery, and at the center of this mystery are the questions. Why are we here? Is there a purpose to our existence, a reason why we're experiencing the beauty and pain of physical life? There's also the mystery of the universe itself. What is it and where did it come from? Religious and spiritual traditions have created complex cosmologies to answer these questions, but each tradition has a different answer, and we're left with profound uncertainty about our deeper reality. Psychologist Dr. Matthew McKay reveals that we can each discover our own answers to these questions, our own inner truth, by connecting with the wisdom of our souls. And Dr. McKay is a clinical psychologist, professor of psychology at the Wright Institute, founder of the Berkeley CBT Clinic, and co-founder of the Bay Area Trauma Recovery Clinic, which serves low-income clients. He's authored and co-authored more than 40 books, including Seeking Jordan, The Luminous Landscape of the Afterlife, and Love in the Time of Impermanence. He's a retired publisher of New Harbinger Publications. He joins us from Berkeley, California. The new book is Lessons from the Afterlife, a Deep Knowledge Meditation Guidebook. Dr. McKay, welcome to Strange Planet. How are you?
I'm good, and it's great to be with you, Richard.
First of all, let's talk about Jordan. Tell us about Jordan.
Well, Jordan is my son. Over 15 years ago, he was on his way home from work and on a bicycle. He was attacked. He was in a furious fight with 4 men. Eventually, he broke away. They shot him in the back, and he died on the street. So my son, at that moment, was taken from me. And I think I experienced what anyone who, has a loved one die suddenly. I wanted to know, does that soul still exist? And I wanted to know, is he okay? So I set out on a quest to find him, to seek him, and to find a way to connect with him. And I tried all kinds of things. I, went to mediums. I experienced something called induced after-death communication with Alan Bach, and it was a beautiful experience in which I could actually hear his voice, and he said some of those things to me that I so desperately needed to hear. But what I really needed most was to have a conversation with him, to be able to ask questions and engage with him, to hear his answers and to come back and respond with my own thoughts and feelings. And so I consulted Ralph Metzner, the late Ralph Metzner, who was a specialist in consciousness and afterlife. And he taught me how to channel and engage in channeled communications. And I was able from that day on to have conversations with Jordan, to ask him questions, to explore with him. And, not only did he, advise and support me in terms of all the issues in my life, but he was also willing to tell me in many cases, what feel like great secrets of the universe, of this greater reality that we live in. And he decided he wanted to write some books that would help people really understand what this place is, why we're here, the nature of the afterlife, and so forth. And so about 2 years ago, he really indicated that he wanted to do something, a book that we would work together on, that would ultimately kind of describe, what the nature of planetary existence, what is physical life, what is the universe itself, why is it there, and why do we incarnate to these planets, and what is our purpose in doing so? So he wanted to really look at that. And he outlined the book in 3 or 4 minutes and said, okay, here's what it's going to be. And then over a period of time, basically dictated most of the material in it.
Do you have daily contact with Jordan?
I meet with him every week. And it's a ritual. I contact him in the same place, in the same environment. I go through a specific ritual that opens the channel, which I could describe to your viewers or listeners. And that process begins to create the open channel for connection. And in that channel, he's had so much to say. I mean, hundreds and hundreds of conversations over the years that have enlightened me and guided me and supported me for all this time.
What is that contact like? Do you see him? Do you hear him? Can you touch him?
I feel him in my body. So that's one of the things that I can feel definite physiological changes in my body as the channel opens, particularly at the top of my head where the channel connects to me. And I experience him telepathically communicating. And what I do in channel writing, the easiest way to do it is you physically write down your questions on a piece of paper or in a notebook. And as the channel communication shows up, as the knowledge shows up in your mind, you write the words that are entering your consciousness. And over the years, he keeps saying things to me that are so surprising, so beyond my range of knowledge, and that I keep being reminded that this is a communication with someone, not me, who has knowledge and wisdom that is far beyond what we arrive on Earth. We forget everything when we get here. We have total amnesia for where we come from in our past lives, and he has access to all of that wisdom, and he continues to really, sometimes it's kind of explode my mind with what he knows and what he offers. And there's things, for example, in Lessons from the Afterlife that are about astrophysics that I know nothing about, and he seems to be completely conversant with. So he keeps reminding me how much he knows and how much more he is aware of than I am able to comprehend here on Earth.
Having contact with Jordan on a weekly basis, how did that affect your grieving process when you lost him 15 years ago?
Yeah. So I still grieve for the physical Jordan. He'd be 39 now, and he'd have had a life and done all kinds of things that I would have been so happy to witness and be part of. And so I miss that. I miss hugging him and holding him and having that human that I love so much in my life. But what it has given me is a sense of his presence, his love. I feel his love actively. I feel his presence. I feel him watching over me, and guiding me. And not just when I'm channeling. I mean, he shows up sometimes with my clients, and will say, "Don't say that. Say this," or as I'm about to make a misstep, he'll suddenly step in. I can hear him very clearly saying to me, "No, don't do that," and offer some other alternative. And so he's guiding me, and I feel his presence and his support. And oddly, this is a strange thing to say, that in some ways I have much more contact with him now and much more access to him now than I did in life. And I feel his presence in some ways more than I did in life. So it has given me a sense of his here and now being with me.
What does he say about where he is, and what is it like?
Well, he's described an afterlife, and he put it together in a book, The Luminous Landscape of the Afterlife. And the afterlife he describes is one in which we are all connected with love. There's no pain whatsoever in the afterlife. When we arrive at the landing place, we have to get used to being without bodies, and we have to get used to seeing at 360 instead of just straight ahead in the way we focus through a body. We have to get used to telepathic communication instead of hearing things via sound. We have to get used to moving by intention rather than muscle. So our legs don't move us forward. Our intention to move in some direction is what actually moves us and creates locomotion. And so we have to, in a landing place, we kind of get used to not having a body. But in some cases, we also have to go through a process of recovering from a lot of the pain that we may have experienced in life, and a lot of residual emotions that we may show up at that moment with, anger, fear, shame, incredible distress. And you can't really go into the spirit world with those kinds of intense emotions. And so we go through periods of healing in many cases, where special, souls who have special skills at healing and soothing support us. And we sometimes enter bardos where other kinds of healing occur. And finally, at a point when those emotions have been resolved, we're really prepared to enter the afterlife. We move into the spirit world, where we begin new processes. And mostly the spirit world is about learning. It's about having a good time. It's about connecting. It's about loving. But a lot of it is about learning. And the first thing we do when we get there is go through the life review, according to Jordan. And I don't know, maybe it's worth just mentioning a little bit what that is, because it's really, it's more than just the idea of seeing your life and what happened in it. It's experiencing your life and all your major all the choices that you made in your connections and interactions with people. All those choices, you experience them as you experience them. You experience them as the other person experiences it. You feel the impact on them of the choice, and then the impact on them over time. So if you slap your son, you experience it as you experience it. You experience the slap as your son feels it, and then also how does it affect your son over time in his development and growth as a human. So it's an incredible experience, and it's a huge learning opportunity. And when we get through that, we often then matriculate to our soul group and begin renewing those relationships and the training and learning that we experience there. So it's a place of beauty. It's a place it's entirely created by energy. There's nothing physical there. So souls together can visualize and imagine things, and they can create them. You can create a house. You can create an environment. And so the spirit world is entirely energy. And the one thing I will say about landing in the spirit world that we have to be careful about is whatever we think in our minds, we can project that. And when Jordan first got to the landing place, he described, so suddenly something would come to his mind. An elephant would come to his mind, and an elephant would be in front of him, and he realized that literally whatever we think about, we can create it through energy, and so we have to kind of learn how to tame that as we enter the spirit world. So anyway, the spirit world is energy and it's love, and in the same way we have air here through which we communicate, the vibration of air. Love is what we communicate through in the spirit world.
And where is it, the spirit world? Is it in a dimension right in front of our nose? Is it up there? Where is it?
Well, that's a wonderful question, and this physical universe is inside the spirit world. It's not like the universe is adjacent or separated in some way. The physical universe is actually inside the spirit world, and while we cannot really participate in the physical universe unless we incarnate in our physical, we can observe the physical universe. And in fact, its entire history we can watch from the spirit world. So time, and as it elapsed from the Big Bang to the very end of this particular universe, we can look at that and see it from the spirit world, and we can see the future literally. Although, which is interesting, according to Jordan, since the future is composed of billions and billions of individual choices, free will choices that souls make, the future can literally change, and what was going to be the future can be altered by all of the decisions that we make in our lifetimes.
All right, Matt, we're going to take a quick time out. We're going to come back and discuss more the lessons from the afterlife, a deep knowledge meditation guidebook. Dr. Matthew McKay, stay with us. Hi there. If you want to watch the rest of these episodes, please head over to my Rumble channel, Richard Syrett's Strange Planet. You can watch complete episodes there. New, complete, unedited episodes drop every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. Again, the Rumble channel is Richard Syrett's Strange Planet. In the meantime, I want to thank you for supporting this YouTube channel all of these years. However, the problem is I never know when I'm going to run afoul of the censors at YouTube. I never know when I'm going to end up in YouTube jail. There doesn't seem to be any rhyme or reason. And in fact, 2 more strikes and this YouTube channel will be taken down altogether. So help me fight big tech censorship, enjoy the complete unedited episodes, and join the rest of the Strange Planet community over on Rumble. Again, Richard Syrett's Strange Planet on rumble.com. See you over there. So let's talk about knowledge meditation. How is it, or what is it rather, and how can it help us access our deepest truth?
Well, the first thing that I think is maybe important to know is that part of our soul energy always remains in the spirit world. And when we incarnate, part of our energy, only part of our energy, enters a physical body, and of course goes through this forgetting process, this amnesia, and forgets where we come from. And so we live these lives here without that knowledge. But part of our soul energy always remains in the spirit world. So our soul group is really always together there. And we are all, and part of us is always present there. So deep knowledge meditation is a way of connecting to our higher self, to our soul knowledge that remains always in spirit. The soul knowledge that has the awareness of perhaps hundreds of lifetimes that we've lived and all of the things that we've learned in spirit. One of the things souls do is periodically merge with the divine, very briefly merge and have huge downloads of knowledge and experience and awareness in those merging experiences. And so our soul knowledge is vast. but we don't have access to it. And the deep knowledge meditation is a way of having access to it. And it really is kind of a simple process. It's starting with a question. Just start with whatever you want to know. It might be, what should I do about a certain situation in my life? Or it could be something much more important, like, why am I here? What's my life purpose? Why did I incarnate at this moment in time, in this family, in this situation on this planet? So the questions can be from very specific solutions to life problems to, the deepest secrets of our life as spirits. Okay, so you start with a question, and then it's a very simple kind of vipassana meditation. It basically is a breath-based meditation. Bring attention down to your diaphragm, down to your breath, center of life, and just observe that experience. And then note it, when you on an in breath, you say in, on an out breath, you say out. Very, very simple. And when thoughts arise, and this is really an important part of this, when thoughts arise, as soon as you can, notice the thought and return to the breath. And so the attention is on the breath, on the in and the out of the breath. As thoughts arise, turn attention to the breath. Now in that place, the mind slowly slows down, and the channel begins to open up to our higher self, to the soul and spirit, part of our soul and spirit. And at a certain point, as you feel that receptivity, that slowing, that opening, that allowing inside of you, you return to your question. And as you return to the question, you allow the answer to show up in whatever way it will. And our soul can communicate with us, our higher self can communicate in various ways. It may show up as a picture or an image. It may show up as a download, this intense knowledge, and then you have to find words for this big download of awareness. It may show up as a whole string of sentences that you have to quickly, try to write down or make sense of. Or just simply a few words as if just a kind of intense few brief focused ideas. But however it shows up, that is the way we can communicate and connect to our higher self. And deep knowledge meditation is something that anybody can do. And I taught hundreds and hundreds of people to do it. In fact, I teach a class on spirituality and psychotherapy. Last night, I taught my class to do it. But it allows us to ask any question we want. And most of these questions we can get answers for from our soul, energy, and spirit. The one thing you shouldn't ask is for the future. Don't ask about what's going to happen in the future, because in a way that'll take away your free will. Right. And so our soul in spirit and other guides that we might turn to are very, very reluctant to give us any information about the future, because that is what we need to grapple with here. We need the uncertainty on Earth because we come here to learn. We come here to take very seriously all these problems in our lives and some of the very serious pain that shows up in our lives. And that pain is teaching us that's our purpose in incarnating to the planet. And so we have to take this life seriously and not know what the future brings.
Is this technique to access your higher self the same technique to channel so that you can contact Jordan?
It's similar, actually, because in this technique, basically, you're channeling yourself. You're channeling your own soul. You're having a conversation with your own soul energy in spirit. In channeling, it's a ritual. I mean, I can describe it as very briefly. Yes, you use that Vipassana meditation. You start, by the way, with eye fixation, something like a candle that it brings your attention to one object. And I encourage people who want to channel a loved one to have an object with them that belonged to the loved one or that was given to them by the loved one. So it's a way of connecting. It's an object that connects them through love to someone on the other side. So they have eye fixation, they have that object, and then they go through the meditation I just described, the focusing on the breath and getting an opening, beginning to open the channel. And your loved ones on the other side are just a thought away. As soon as you think about them, you're opening the channel. You don't realize that. You think of them and the channel is opening, and you could begin to ask questions and get answers telepathically. So what we're doing really is just opening the channel in a very deliberate way, a ritualistic way. And Ralph Messer also taught me to visualize, as I'm beginning to open the channel, an orb the color of the sun just above my head. And at that point, I start to feel Jordan's presence in my body. And then visualizing that orb turning into a tube that essentially extends to Jordan in the afterlife. And I think of him with love. And as that channel opens, then I can write my first question. And actually, the process of writing the question is part of channeling. It actually creates an altered state. You're watching the words take form on the page, and then you wait for the answer to show up, and you begin to write that. And again, the answer can show up as a download. It's a huge amount of knowledge that you have to find words for, as a kind of an intense string of words and sentences, or just a very compressed few words or sentences, or as a picture. It can come in any way. And just to be prepared to put down in your own words what you're hearing or experiencing or seeing.
Do you remember the first question you asked Jordan?
Yeah, I think the first question was, "Are you there?" and because it was the most compelling thing that I had animated me for the whole time I was seeking him and searching for him. "Are you there?" And his immediate answer was, "I'm here. I'm with you. I'm watching over you. My love is always with you." And so he started out by being very, very clear that he was present not only during the channeling process and at that moment, but that in my life he was frequently observing and with me and supporting me.
Were you initially suspicious of the process?
Yes, absolutely. And anybody who channels is going to have some doubt, because the telepathic words that are showing up in your mind could be your own. It could be your own wish to connect and your own desire for that soul to still be part of your life. And so I think doubt is an unavoidable part of this process. And I think some people get defeated by it. It's like the doubt shows up and then they go, well, maybe this isn't real and I shouldn't be doing it. And Jordan says, in a way, that the doubt is just something we have to work through. It's part of the static that exists in this effort to connect to the other side, to connect to the afterlife. And so it's always going to show up in various degrees. But what really helps me with the doubt is, first of all, what I already mentioned, that Jordan says things that blow my mind that I have no knowledge of. I can't imagine where it came from. And then he has a style of speaking and communicating that's completely different from mine. And so as the words show up in that particular style and cadence, I know that I'm communicating with an entity outside of myself. So yes, there's always a certain amount of doubt. And that doubt is unavoidable. And yet the rewards from channeling, I've taught so many people to channel. I have a lot of clients who have, serious grief problems and struggle with grief. And when they learn to channel and begin to reestablish their relationship, and they learn that their loved one is not gone, they're right there, and death doesn't take them away. Death doesn't change in any way the love between them. And so when they learn that, it's a profound gift that they get to carry in their lives. They have that person back. And the experience of having them back is so rewarding, so warming, and gives us so much love that it's worth all the doubt.
Where does Jordan say the universe came from? Is there a creator?
Yes, there is yes, the answer is yes, but it's different than we imagine. I grew up Catholic, and my understanding of God as a Catholic was that God was perfect. God had always existed from the very beginning, and of course, God created everything. That was the basic idea. But Jordan says that God, or the divine, or all, whatever we want to call this energy, did not always exist, and that in the dark void before anything, there was always what he calls primal energy, which is potential. Mm-hmm. And that energy by its nature always evolves. It always evolves. Energy has built into it this evolutionary force or energy. And so eventually energy evolves into, in the great void, it evolved into newer forms like light. And when energy began to evolve into light, the next thing that happened is the light started to become conscious of itself. The light started to be aware of itself. And so awareness grew out of light, which grew out of primal energy. And as the awareness began to develop, that is where the divine started. It was that first awareness. And then what he talks about is that once there was a consciousness, once consciousness existed, consciousness could then impact the energy. And we know that. There are all kinds of research in quantum physics that shows that conscious awareness can impact the direction of subatomic particles and energetically affect them, and actually create conditions in which subatomic particles will rise to visibility out of the great energy matrix. Consciousness does that. And so the consciousness of all of the divine began to interact with the energy field, to begin creating the ability to rise some of the elements of energy into observability, into what could be seen, into physical forms. And so the universe was created by consciousness. So in some ways it fits with some of our classic beliefs that God made all this stuff. But God was not always around. Primal energy was always around. And primal energy eventually evolved into light and into consciousness and into all, which then created a physical universe. Now, why did all create a physical universe? This is what Jordan kind of really strikes me with this. All of this was created so that consciousness, all, God, divine, whatever we call it, could grow and evolve. God, it's not perfect. It's continuing to grow and evolve and learn. And then specifically, so it creates a physical universe, and then it creates individual souls, us, which we are part of God. We are God. To enter into the physical universe, to learn there, and everything we learn gets uploaded so that God, all divine, evolves and grows and learns with us. So we're on a sacred mission here. Our mission is to go into this difficult place, this place where there's so much pain, so much challenge, and learn here. But primarily, we're learning how to love in the face of pain, which isn't possible to learn in the afterlife because there's no pain there. So learning how to love in the face of pain, in the face of all these obstacles and struggles that we have, that's our job. And we take that knowledge and we upload it to all. It's sort of like we're like bees that go out of the hive. Individual souls go out of the hive, collect honey, but in our case, we're collecting knowledge and wisdom in the face of all the struggle and difficulty on this earth, bringing it back to all. And also our own evolution as individual souls is part of our growth as well. So we're here to learn. And that's what George says. And all this pain that we experience, it's not failure. We're not screwing up when we have pain. The pain is part of why we're here, because this helps to teach us.
Dr. Matthew McKay, Lessons from the Afterlife. A quick timeout, back with more right here on Strange Planet. Hi there. If you want to watch the rest of these episodes, please head over to my Rumble channel, Richard Syrett's Strange Planet. You can watch complete episodes there. New, complete, unedited episodes drop every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. Again, the Rumble channel is Richard Syrett's Strange Planet. In the meantime, I want to thank you for supporting this YouTube channel all of these years. However, the problem is I never know when I'm going to run afoul of the censors at YouTube. I never know when I'm going to end up in YouTube jail. There doesn't seem to be any rhyme or reason. And in fact, 2 more strikes and this YouTube channel will be taken down altogether. So help me fight big tech censorship, enjoy the complete unedited episodes, and join the rest of the Strange Planet community over on Rumble. Again, Richard Syrett's Strange Planet on rumble.com. See you over there. Dr. Matthew McKay is with us, Lessons from the Afterlife. What does Jordan say about the purpose of, well, you've talked about the purpose of life on Earth, but what is the sort of the process of evolution for the soul? Like your son Jordan now, it sounds like he's kind of like a soul being, no physical body. What is the next step for him? Is he going to incarnate again, reincarnate? Will there be a time when you can no longer contact him? What happens next?
Well, he's already reincarnated, and he's a 11 or 12-year-old girl, single mom, a different ethnicity than I am, and apparently destined to have a longer life, and there's a certain life purpose for that particular life, different from Jordan's purpose in coming to his brief life here with us. So he's already incarnated. But remember I was saying that the soul energy can divide up. So part of his soul energy, just like part of yours and part of mine, always remains in the spirit world. And so that's the part of Jordan that I can communicate to, and that's the part of him that has all of the vast knowledge of his hundreds of past lives and all the things he's learned in spirit. Whereas the part of his energy that has entered the body of this girl, he's an amnesiac. He can't remember any of that in her body. And he is encountering the life as with no knowledge of where he comes from or why he's here. And so, this paradox exists where, he's here physically again in a life, but he's also remains always in spirit, and I can always communicate to him there. If only all of his energy was in this young woman, I couldn't talk to him because he wouldn't have awareness of where he is, who he is, and where he comes from. So, but we're all in that position. So every one of us who has loved ones on the other side, they may very well be incarnating again, but part of their energy will always remain in the afterlife and can always be available to us. And so when we think of them, if we want to channel with them, they are always literally there.
Is that we talk about the Akashic record as this, ethereal library, like the Library of Alexandria, rather, where we can access all information, every thought that anyone has ever had, and so forth. Is that really what we're talking about when we talk about the Akashic record, that we're contacting our higher selves?
Well, that's really a great question. The Akashic record, as Jordan has explained it to me anyway, is it's the primary learning tool in the afterlife, and so we actually spend in the afterlife a lot of time looking at the Akashic record. And some of that is looking at our own lives, and the many different events in which we can zero in and look at them. It's kind of like opening a page in a book. The book is just closed, and it's just whatever's in there is unavailable to you. But when you open it, you begin to read. And so we can open the Akashic record at any point and begin to observe the experience. And the thing, though, that is so cool about the Akashic record is that you can observe what could have happened. if you had done something else. And so each decision moment, deciding moment, each point in your life where you could have gone on one fork of the road versus the other, you could look and see, well, what would have happened if I had done this other thing? And you could literally watch the entire outcome take place. And there's so much learning from that. And you can also look at other lives, anybody's life, and you can look at it and study it and see, when Abe Lincoln was getting around to writing the Gettysburg Address, well, how did he make that decision? And there might have been other things that he might have written or might have said. We could actually see what would have happened if he'd said something else or done some other alternative or made some other choice. And so we can learn from other lives, from our own life. But the biggest thing we learn is what would have happened if I had done something differently. And so there's this huge, powerful wisdom in the Akashic record. So we do spend a lot of time observing it. But the other thing we're doing in the afterlife is many of us are developing spiritual careers. And spiritual careers are things that we actually do in the afterlife that don't involve, coming to Earth. And these careers may involve becoming a healer, a guide, actually engaging and creating certain aspects of the physical universe. Souls join together to literally create matter and energy in certain ways, and teachers. So they're actually scientists, spiritual career of a certain kind of science, of advancing science in the afterlife. So there's a lot we learn up there, not just from the Akashic record, but we learn we learn new skills that are then applicable to our future as souls.
Does Jordan have a new career?
Yeah, he's a guide. And spending a lot of time learning how to change mass consciousness, as he explains it. What are the techniques for changing mass consciousness? How do you do that? And there are souls that are, incarnating now at this moment. This is a flux point in history. It's a real turning point. And there are a lot of souls that are incarnating at this moment in time who have skills about changing mass consciousness and are busy tipping the mean of the earth and of human consciousness from tribal focus, which is really gotten us in a lot of trouble. It's there's the tribal focus is there's the good people, us, and then there's the bad people, them, and we see that happening in the world right now in very horrible and dramatic ways. And we're moving from the tribal mean to a sense of oneness. And so there are a lot of souls here now that are actually working and have skills to help change mass consciousness to move more toward oneness from this very limited tribal perspective that actually is the source of so much conflict and war.
You mentioned with reincarnation and how we have amnesia. We have no concept or memory of a previous incarnation. Although there are many who believe you can experience previous lives through past life regression therapy. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, Michael Newton pioneered past life regression therapy in his book Journey of Souls, and he worked with 7,000 people before he actually wrote any of those books. And learned how to go into a past life, regress them to a past life, and then he would progress them to their death in that past life, and then to the life between lives. And he found of those 7,000 people that almost all of them agreed on what the afterlife looked like. They were hypnotized and were naive, and they didn't know what he knew, and yet they describe an afterlife that's remarkably similar. And I learned to do his regression as well. I'm a good hypnotist and a psychologist. I've used hypnosis for most of my career, but when I learned his particular method, I began doing that. I would regress people to usually a fairly immediate past life, progress them to their death in that life, and then enter the life between lives, and I got to be a witness to people's amazing experiences as they look at the afterlife and describe what's there. So I felt very privileged to do that, and so I very much believe that that's what Newton discovered is true. There's a so-called Newton Society of people who have learned how to do his particular life between life hypnotic regression, and if somebody wants to have that experience, can consult with them. But it is a beautiful, beautiful experience, and Ralph Messner did it with me. He regressed me to past life and then to life between lives, and I had this glimpse of that world myself, and it was very, not just beautiful, but inspiring. It felt like, oh, that's home. That's where we belong. There's a sense of being rooted there. And so, yeah, it's a beautiful experience, and it also confirms, that we are immortal souls, and we have a life outside of this physical body.
If it's not too personal a question, when is your next meeting with Jordan, and what are you going to ask him?
It's Saturday. I usually meet with him on Saturday, and we are talking about what he describes as soul freedom. How do we get to a place where we actually have authentic or free will? Because there's so many things that impact our free will, our desires and our pain and our ego and the demands of our body. And there's a lot of things that really kind of can constrict our free will. And so he's really looking at now, how do we free ourselves of those constrictions so that we have real free will, that we actually make choices, and that we can make choices based on love, not on the demands of our body or our ego or the pain that we're struggling with, or any of these other forces that surround us. But how do we get to a place where we have real ability to choose, what you call soul freedom? And he's been working on that for a little while with me.
Lessons from the Afterlife, a deep knowledge meditation guidebook. How do we get a copy?
It's in all the places that we normally see, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, all the bookstores. It is out there pretty widely.
Matt, a great pleasure. Thank you so much for this.
Thank you so much, Richard. Really enjoyed talking to you.
Hi there. If you want to watch the rest of these episodes, please head over to my Rumble channel, Richard Saret's Strange Planet. You can watch complete episodes there. New, complete, unedited episodes drop every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. Again, the Rumble channel is Richard Saret's Strange Planet. In the meantime, I want to thank you for supporting this YouTube channel all of these years. However, the problem is I never know when I'm going to run afoul of the censors at YouTube. I never know when I'm going to end up in YouTube jail. There doesn't seem to be any rhyme or reason. And in fact, 2 more strikes and this YouTube channel will be taken down altogether. So help me fight big tech censorship, enjoy the complete unedited episodes, and join the rest of the Strange Planet community over on Rumble. Again, Richard Saret's Strange Planet on rumble.com. See you over there.